What's up, friends? It's me, your friend Max Mogren, here in beautiful Alpine, Wyoming, with a special edition of Wake Up Wyoming. It's February 2nd, 2018. We got a big show today looking at the state of the snowpack, not just in Wyoming, but across the country here in the United States, focusing especially on the western states, because disturbing trend here, there ain't no snow. Looking at New Mexico here at the National Resources Conservation Service of the National Water and Climate Center. You can see there's no snow in New Mexico up in the mountains. What's up, Pancho La Mancha? Thanks for tuning in from Chicago. Looking at Arizona, again, no snow. Southern Utah, they got a little snow, but not very much. You can see based on the color coding here, that light yellow is less than 18 inches of snow. Colorado, similar situation, especially down south. No snow. No snow. Northern Colorado doing a little better, but still not good by any stretch of the imagination. Looking at some of the basic resorts there, where do we got here? Well, the gist of it, no snow in Colorado. Thank you so much for tuning in. Utah, similar situation, very low snow. California, or Nevada, looking at Nevada, very, very low snow. And, of course, out in California, in the Sierras, despite California's attempts to augment the snowpack with weather modification, very low snow. Similar situation in Oregon, southern Idaho. Here in Idaho, we're doing okay. Grand Targhee Resort reporting 88 inches of snow, so that puts us, in the dark green, which is nice. Washington, similar situation. They got good snowpack in parts of Washington, but southern no-go. So there's a quick little glance at it. Looking at the entire country, you can see it's a really low snow year. Again, no snow down south in Arizona and New Mexico. Rob Hoff chiming in, telling me to check out Truckey's forecast. What's up, Rob? Are they going to get pooped on or what? There's some snow in the high Sierras, but still not what we would expect. Nevada, no snow. Doing all right here in Idaho. Looking at the Midwest, my hometown of Winona, Minnesota, only has between 1 and 6 inches of snow. Not how I remember it as a child. And across the country, pretty low snow is the key take-home point here. Again, back at the National Water and Climate Center, looking at how this snowpack shapes up historically. We don't have data for February yet. The government's slacking off. But looking at January data, mountain snowpack as of January 1st, 2018, that red means less than 25% of the median snowpack. So again, Arizona, New Mexico, no snow. California, extremely low. Nevada, extremely low. Utah, extremely low. Colorado, extremely low. Doing all right here in Idaho, where we've got, about 100% of snowpack. Oregon, really low snow. And again, as we saw on the other maps, Montana, Northern Idaho, Washington, doing okay. But we're taking a big look at this. If you're not familiar with my work, why I am reasonably competent to talk about snow, I've been a ski bum for a very long time. Sean Byer, what's up? Winona, shout out. Yeah, sorry you don't got any snow there. But, my work, I do a local snow report here. I'm no climatologist. I'm no meteorologist. But I do go out into the mountains pretty much every day. I've sailed all over the Pacific Ocean, and my life depends on the weather, so I pay close attention to it. I do a little recon and snow reports for the good old-fashioned Jackson Hole Air Force, and, generally, I like to think I know what I talk about because I kind of take my life into my own hands just about every day, playing in the snow. Check out my snow reports. And the reason I'm doing this video in particular is because of a report out of the Coloradan, which admittedly is not the most reliable source of information, given that it's a subsidiary of USA Today. But big headline, climate change propaganda coming out of USA Today, aka the Coloradan. This is the weather and climate we fear, climate change and Colorado's ski slopes. Of course, ski communities like here in Jackson Hole, the Sierra Nevada area of California, all the Colorado resorts depend greatly on snow, and they're getting skunked this winter. Recent storms offered life support to many of the state's snow-starved ski areas, but as of early January, Colorado's snowpack was lower than it had been in 30 years. Last year was the state's second warmest year ever. Ski resorts in Colorado, the snow sports stalwart of the nation, will lose millions of dollars this season because of paltry, slow, and balmy temperatures. One resort leader estimated the whole state is having its worst opening in 20 years, said Auden Schendler, vice president of sustainability for Aspen Snowmass, during a December interview. This is the weather and climate we fear. It's already here. It goes on, but the gist of it is it's bad news, really bad news. Mountain snowpack has decreased 20 to 60% at most monitoring sites in Colorado since the 1950s, according to an Environmental Protection Agency analysis. We know Colorado's average temperature has increased more than 2 degrees in the last 40 years. It goes on. It's a good read. You can find it over there at coloradan.com. But key thing, let's see, Aspen Snowmass and Arapahoe Basin reported a 13% drop in visits between opening day and December 31st compared to the same period last year. Early season visits last season were down 8% from the year before when heavy snow provided a boost. So ski resorts across the country, not just in Colorado, suffering due to this. Of course, what is the ski industry's proposed solution to climate change? How are they going to combat this? Good question. Good question. You know, it focuses on sustainability, combating climate change. But what is climate change really? That's the question we're really getting into today. Again, Auden Schendler, always in the forefront of any media about weather and snow and climate in relation to the ski industry. But I got to say, Auden Schendler's not really telling us the whole story. This guy collecting a hefty paycheck from Aspen Snowmass, but not really getting into all of the reasons why the climate is so screwed up. Of course, there you can see prime example of Auden in the news. Colorado ski industry challenged to do more to fight climate change. How the ski industry plans to fight it? Good question. Powder Magazine asking, can Auden Schendler save skiing last year, January 9th? I don't really think so, unless he starts addressing all of the factors that contribute to our changing climate. Down in Aspen, where Auden Schendler is collecting paychecks to greenwash the climate change agenda, doesn't look too good. Highs in the 40s most of the week. Chance of snow, of course, it's going to come down as rain if it's 40 degrees. So no end in sight for the snow drought in Colorado. Here in the mountains of Idaho, we're sitting a little prettier, but definitely a little warmer than we'd like it to be, with daytime highs in the mid to upper 30s all this week. You know, all that forecasted snow might just blow in as wind and blow right out as high clouds, or we're going to get rained on. And, you know, we'll catch some snow up high, but we really like that top to bottom pow-pow. So, you know, not looking too much better here in the Teton Range. Of course, the primary organization fighting the climate change agenda for skiing, Jeremy Jones, heli board extraordinaire phenom of the early 2000s, has his Protect Our Winters organization, and they make their stance really clear. The world is getting hotter, and it's our fault. Of course, Protect Our Winters, like the vast majority of controlled environmental organizations, only talking about CO2, not addressing all of the factors contributing to our really wacky weather in the world today. Over there, Protect Our Winters, they got all these pro skiers on board. Look at them all signing on to push an agenda that only focuses on CO2 and human carbon emissions, while overlooking the many factors that contribute to our changing climate. Can't stress that enough. We're going to really get into it today. Also unusual about Protect Our Winters activism is they never mention geoengineering. Geoengineering is a quote-unquote proposed solution to climate change using technological means, including large-scale weather modification programs. And as we will see shortly, these programs have actually existed for quite some time. But geoengineering, widely covered in the mainstream press, 29,600 results. Of course, all of this coverage tells us that these are some pie-in-the-sky technologies that haven't really been tested, would never be used for nefarious reasons, covert purposes, perhaps weather warfare. So the the story on geoengineering, very muddy, but strange how the ski industry, Protect Our Winters, the ski advocacy climate activist group, never addresses geoengineering, never addresses weather modification, never addresses all of the factors contributing to our wacky weather. And we're over there at Popular Science now as we move forward here. An article from August 2004. Pretty old, but you know, Popular Science, generally regarded as a scientific and reputable source. What do they say? Air traffic blues. NASA links jet contrails to global warming. Now what? In 2002, using data collected during a 3-day grounding of all aircraft in the U.S. after 9/11, scientists discovered that contrails, the wispy white streaks that trail jets, were narrowing the natural day-night temperature cycle in well-trafficked areas. Now, a NASA study indicates that warmed-up nights are outpacing cooled-down days. In the U.S., for example, detailed atmospheric modeling suggests that contrails could account for a climate warming trend just under 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade, measured between 1975 and 1994. That amount may seem trivial, even though it's like a degree per decade, but as air traffic grows, the rate of temperature increase may be 6 times as great by 2050. Contrails form. Of course, you could call contrails chemical trails, right? Because planes emit chemicals. Contrails form as the water vapor in jet exhaust condenses and freezes whenever an airplane flies between roughly 28 and 40,000 feet. In the presence of enough humidity, they spread into huge, thin cirrus clouds. A few contrails can merge into a swath the size of Kansas and Nebraska. It goes on and on. But the key thing here is that all the way back in 2004, NASA told us that air traffic was warming the planet. That's right, air traffic warming the planet. You don't hear about that from Protect Our Winters. You don't hear about that from Auden Schindler. You don't hear about that from the mainstream press these days, but it's still happening. Most people don't know this either. You don't get this in too much mainstream coverage of the climate issue, but the most important greenhouse gas is actually water vapor and clouds, contributing somewhere between 36 and 72% to the total warming of the greenhouse effect of planet Earth. In comparison, carbon dioxide only accounts for between 9 and 26% of that warming. Prompts the obvious question, why are we so concerned about CO2 when human activities are clearly affecting the composition and behavior of water in the upper atmosphere? Water, again, the most powerful greenhouse gas by far. Now, to confirm that story over at Popular Science, we're over at NASA's EarthObservatory.gov. This is an article by NASA scientist Steve Graham, published on March 1st, 1999. If we're going to have a serious discussion about climate, apparently we have to also include studying clouds. Peter Coate chiming in, funnily, NASA, never a straight answer. But, you know, I'd say they're more reputable than USA Today when it comes to addressing the climate issue. The study of clouds, where they occur, and their characteristics play a key role in the understanding of climate change. Low, thick clouds primarily reflect solar radiation and cool the surface of the Earth. High, thin clouds primarily transmit incoming solar radiation. At the same time, they trap some of the outgoing infrared radiation emitted by the Earth and radiate it back downward, thereby warming the surface of the Earth. That's right, clouds, high, thin, wispy cirrus clouds, like the kind we see coming out of the ass end of airplanes all too often. All over the world, people are concerned about this, are proven to warm the surface of the Earth, if we can trust NASA. Moving along here, I'm over at weathermodificationhistory.com, looking at the history of weather modification. This a article from the Deseret Weekly, Salt Lake City, Utah, published in 1891. There was already mainstream coverage on intentionally manipulating the weather to increase precipitation back in the 1890s. Weathermodificationhistory.com, a great resource for anybody that wants to know more about the state of the climate, wants to know more about the history of the very fascinating topic of weather modification and unintentional attempts or unintentional ways humans have manipulated the climate as well. But moving along here, we can see all the way in 1946, it was reported in the mainstream press that cloud seeding was effective. It was being used to create clouds, to create precipitation, to create snow. Gettysburg Times. There we can see all the way back in the 40s, man-made snowstorms. U.S. experiments to change the weather, 1947. Scientists claim 9 new ways to make snow, 1947. And all the way back in 1947, Life magazine, in collaboration with Seagram's whiskey, a whiskey that all skiers love, was already looking at the possibility of using cloud seeding to make the skiing better. That's right. Cloud seeding, Seagram's, skiers love whiskey, skiers love powder snow. Naturally, back then in 1947, the fine folks at Seagram's Canadian Whiskey were informing their imbibers that we were soon going to have an era of unprecedented powdery snow due to the bevy of flakes brought down by intentional weather modification. But at the same time, the military was already looking into using these technologies for nefarious reasons. Rain of death experiments documented in the Queensland Times, 1947. The American military experimenting with exploding atomic bombs in the midst of storm clouds to create a rain of death. And the use of weather as a war weapon studied by the United States in 1948, reported in the mainstream press. Success. Confirmed successes. 1950, The Age, coming out of Melbourne, Australia. Nobel Prize-winning scientist Irving Langmuir saying, hey, we did it. We have been effectively changing the weather on a massive scale. And, I don't know. The headline speaks for itself. Rainmaking beyond doubt, coming out of the Sydney Morning Herald. There's a lot of coverage in the history of weather modification from Australian newspapers because in Australia, they've got a lot of desert. Great comment here from Beth Hoover. Hey, Idaho, the Standing Rock water protectors were talking about cloud seeding to freeze them out. I thought they were paranoid. It's funny you mentioned that, Beth, because I was out at Standing Rock when those snowstorms hit in early December. And it was a really funny situation where the storm came in at the same time there was this big benefit concert at the Prairie Knights Casino. It started to drizzle. Then it started to pour rain. Then it started to dump snow, snowed about a foot. And then the temperature dropped well below zero for the next week, basically rendering the encampments totally incapacitated right at the height of the camp's power shortly after Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving's when the camps swelled to all-time record sizes. And at the same time, well, I'm going to bring it up here because I can. Over at my Instagram account, I was up there in February, too. And in February, when the camps were being kicked out, middle of February, end of February, it was really strange because the main justification for taking the camps out was concern about the Cannonball River flooding due to this really freak warm spell that was occurring at the time in North Dakota. And the river was really at no risk of flooding. Here we're getting into my Standing Rock picks, but I wanted to bring up one in particular right there. This is from February 17th, 2017. At the same time, when it was mid-February in North Dakota, and the temperature was in the 50s every day, overnight lows not getting below freezing, the camps turned into a quagmire of mud. This is what the sky looked like overhead every day. Again, if we can trust NASA, and we can because it's obvious, you can go out and feel it, when you've got this horrible high wispy cirrus haze created by airplanes, it traps heat. It makes it hotter than it would be otherwise. People wonder why it's so hot coast to coast in the United States right now, why the snow sucks all over the country. And my guess would be that this has something to do with it. Again, back to the headlines from 1952. These technologies were already perfected. Moving on, weather is a new weapon, 1953. No big surprise that Standing Rock had weather weapons used against it when these technologies have been around for 70 years. Moving along, worldwide climate control and weather war seen possible, coming out of the Toledo Blade, one of America's great newspapers in one of America's great cities, 1956. 1956. So it's out there. The Spokane Daily out of Washington State, huge savings possible if the weather's controlled. Naturally, there is an incredible incentive to manipulating the weather for a lot of reasons, militarily, economically, sociologically. And here we see, coming out of the Bend Bulletin, Central Oregon's daily newspaper, all the way back in 1958, people were already complaining about the impact of aviation tracks on the weather. The contrails are not disappearing, but are breaking down into a haze and creating a cloud-like appearance in the sky. The Air Force figures its jets couldn't blot out the sun short of a wing-to-wing mass flight like the European bombing raids of World War II. Got a little infographic of that here. Impact, the Army Air Force's confidential picture issue of World War II in 8 books. Clearly blotting out the sun right there. But the point is, people were already complaining about the impact of aviation on the skyscape back in 1958. And at the same time, we had already figured out ways to eliminate trails, right? If this is such a concern, which it is, these planes creating cirrus clouds, clearly affecting the weather, clearly affecting the climate, since climate is merely a factor of weather over time. All the way back in 1958, Cornell had figured out how to eliminate them. And it's confirmed, well, let's see. There we go. A lab developed a contrail elimination device. This picture here you can see on this official U.S. Air Force photo shows the effect of the contrail elimination system devised by Cornell Aeronautical Laboratory. It's installed on one of the 4 engines, and you can see there's only 3 contrails because the 4th engine is not producing one due to this device that was developed 70, 80, 90, 2000, 58 years ago. So, moving back, though, you know, all the way back in 1958, our friends at Popular Science talking about weather as a weapon. St. Petersburg Times, St. Petersburg Flora, weather control seen as the ultimate weapon. 1959. Vapor trails may soon vanish. Popular Mechanics confirming for us that these trails affect the weather, and there was technology all the way back then to eliminate them. Pittsburgh Press, 1962. National Academy of Sciences wants the government to invest $108 million over the next 10 years studying weather control. Pittsburgh Press, 1962. $108 million was actually a lot of money back in 1962. Now, not so much due to inflation. 1964, the press in Binghamton, New York, documenting the trails in the sky, unusual. The U.S. accused of arming the weather. Soviet colonel charges that the U.S. scientists are working on ways of turning hurricanes toward communist countries back in 1964. Hurricanes to be seeded for control, 1965. This is Project Storm Fury. Look it up. It actually worked. They did it. They conducted this experiment for 21 years, and believe it or not, you can steer, weaken, strengthen hurricanes. The president sees progress in weather control coming out of the Bulletin. Washington, UPI, 1965. President Johnson told Congress today that substantial progress has been made in developing scientific means of changing the nation's weather and climate, but the pace has been too slow. More weather warfare. Warfare's next weapon. Vice Admiral Rayborn. This was a CIA document released in 2000. He's talking about using the weather as a weapon back in the mid-1960s. And it actually was. Interesting here, Popular Science all the way back in 1969. You know, you look at mainstream coverage of the climate issue now, it's all about CO2. They don't talk about anything but CO2, maybe methane if it's a really scientific source. But all the way back in 1969, Popular Science was telling us new scientific research says that car exhaust, industrial air pollution, and jet trails could be altering the Earth's climate and may be bringing us into a new ice age. That's right. Back in the 60s and 70s, the scientific consensus was that we were going to put ourselves into a new ice age using modern technologies. Confirmed in this book, 1974's The Weather Machine by Nigel Calder. What does it all mean? I guess the scientists aren't really totally sure about anything. Back in 1969, they already reported success in taming Hurricane Debbie at the Salamanca Free Press, or Republican Press, Salamanca, New York. And NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, talking about Project Storm Fury. It worked. Steering hurricanes is real. National Geographic, April 1972. Wispy wake of the jet era, a contrail created by an airliner's exhaust grows into a cirrus cloud over the Colorado Rockies. Meteorologists fear such man-induced effects may disturb the Earth's weather system. No shit. Kind of stands to reason. Now we're getting into the 70s, and it came out in the wash that the CIA was using the weather as a weapon over Vietnam for 9 years. From 1962 until 1971, they were intentionally using the weather as a weapon to cause flooding. Large-scale weather control techniques might be used to cause extreme flooding in strategic areas or even to bring a new ice age upon the enemy, Rayborn wrote. 1972. Confirmed by the Canberra, Australia Times that cloud seeding was in fact used by the U.S. over Vietnam. This is coming out of the Associated Press and Reuters, rather reputable source there. Yeah. And again, coming out of the Ledger, same thing. Top secret Vietnam weather controlling revealed. The weather used as a weapon by the American military, by the CIA. Confirmed again by The Age out of Melbourne, Australia, 1972. And in 1972, a big year, we also figured out that we could manipulate the weather using radio waves. This is like HARP, guys. This is like the NEXRAD transmitters. Thank you, Rob Hoff. Thanks for tuning in. You have a lovely day, sir. But coming out of New Scientist out of London, 1972, you know, the pace of technological development in manipulating the weather and climate was already heating up to the extent that senators tried to ban weather weaponry, ban weather wars. In 1972, the ball got rolling on that. And by 1974, the ban on weather war was approved. Of course, you know, the UN, NATO, they've also banned torture, but that doesn't stop enhanced interrogation techniques. Okay, we've had the technology to manipulate the weather on such a grand scale that they had to ban it in 1974. Anthony Blackler chiming in here in New Zealand. We have had one of the hottest summers ever, with temperatures in the high 30s, early 40s Celsius. Yeah, crazy hot there. I actually met some Australians, went skiing with me the other day. They're from a ski resort in Australia about 5 hours north of Melbourne, and they left because it's just crazy wildfires, temperatures, you know, approaching 40 degrees Celsius every darn day. Funny how the weather's so screwed up. I wonder why. All the way back in 1977, Idaho and Washington were fighting over who has the right to rain because Washington, using cloud seeding programs to alleviate a drought there, was charged with perpetuating a drought, causing a drought in Idaho. Okay, moving along. Canberra Times, 1978, jets may affect the weather. Vapor trails from jet aircraft may be responsible for some weather changes, according to studies being carried out at the University of Illinois. Goes on and on. Weather control seen within the next 10 years. That's 1978, meaning that, according to the AP out of San Francisco, as reprinted in the Spokane Daily Chronicle, the United States was going to be able to manipulate the weather. Within 10 years, governments could be manipulating weather to end war, prevent drought and starvation, reduce hurricanes and hailstorms, and keep ski areas packed with snow, a social scientist predicts. Of course, if you can use the weather, you can use weather modification technologies to end war, prevent drought and starvation, reduce hurricanes and hailstorms, and keep snow flowing at the ski resorts. You can also do the exact opposite with those technologies, right? Banger Daily News, 1978, NASA creating clouds over Alaska in conducting weather experiment. Popular Mechanics, 1981, contrails and clouds. Scientists report that jet trails woven over portions of the Midwest have cut sunshine and increased cloudiness throughout the area. The increased cloudiness lowers temperatures by day by reflecting sunshine back into space and increases heat at night when clouds bounce warmth back to the ground. Okay, that's 1981. That's the year I was born. This is a long time ago. A long time ago. And we already knew this. But looking at the mainstream press today, looking at the kooks that protect our winters, looking at Auden Schindler's words, the Vice President of Sustainability at Aspen Snowmass Ski Resort, they're just pushing an agenda, guys. They're talking CO2 and nothing else. The real weather story is much bigger than all of that. Coming out of the Canberra Times, 1981, Thursday, October 15th, 1981. Jets changing the climate for good or ill. Jets vapor trails altering the climate over Chicago. Okay. Aircraft pollution brings on rainy weather. Coming out of New Scientist, same 1981. Everybody's citing this one study, but it's because it was some legit science by legit scientists at the University of Chicago back in the 80s. Pretty racist political cartoon there. My, how the times have kind of changed. Moving along. All the way back in 1995. Oh, I should say, then, it's kind of funny, in the era, you'd think that we would have more and more reporting on these issues since it was such a big deal. But around the early 80s, the Western press really stopped talking about this stuff. There was all this hoopla throughout from 1891 up until 1980, all this talk about weather modification, climate modification, weather warfare, proposals to melt the ice caps using nuclear bombs. And then all of a sudden, the media went silent. It wasn't until, then 1995, Popular Science starts covering HAARP. A new research installation is beaming powerful radio energy into the upper atmosphere. Exploring conventional and exotic military uses of the airwaves are its goals. Pentagon hopes to win the weather wars, coming out of the Salamanca Press, 1997. This citing the famous landmark paper out of the Air Force, Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. Mainstream coverage back in the day. Turns out Nikola Tesla, this is a book written in 2002. What did Tesla say way back in the 1890s? He knew that he could control weather by either electrically collecting clouds or gathering or dispersing their moisture, or by moving clouds along predetermined paths and releasing their contents with an electrical trigger to produce rain. He knew that with his sonic lapping of the earth, he called this the science of geodynamics, he could release and adjust the pent-up tectonic forces of the earth and thereby prevent serious earthquakes. Goes on and on. Turns out that Tesla guy who electrified the entire world figured out how to tap into ionospheric energy that rendered fossil fuels obsolete, developed death rays, developed wireless communication technologies like radio, also figured out how to manipulate the weather. Coming out of Popular Science back in 2002, another thing about the contrail, aka chemtrail phenomenon, where after 9/11, they figured out that the temperature differentials between day and night were drastically affected. Also important to note, as we saw in that 2004 Popular Science article, the overall impact was warming. 2004, Popular Science. Now a NASA study indicates that warmed up nights are outpacing cooled down days. In the U.S., for example, detailed atmospheric modeling suggests that contrails could account for a climate warming trend just under 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade, measured between 1975 and 1994. The amount may seem trivial, but as air traffic grows, major airlines are expected to increase their fleets 40% by 2015. The rate of temperature increase may be 6 times as great by 2050. Of course, important to note that the technology to prevent contrail formation was already developed back in the 1960s, which prompts the obvious question: if these clouds are affecting the weather, why hasn't anything been done about it? Maybe it's because the mainstream press doesn't talk about it anymore. Maybe it's because controlled opposition environmentalists like Protectourwinters and Auden Schindler over there at Aspen Snowmass are collecting big paychecks to sell you a load of bullshit. Moving along. Coming out of the recorder out of Greenfield, Mass. in 2006, do jet contrails add to global warming? Yes, and in fact they do. In fact they do. It's confirmed. And this is just some other stuff. In deflecting hurricanes, where do we aim them? Covered in the Washington Post, 1970. Again, the weather war ban and confirmation from The Age out of Melbourne, Australia, that the U.S. was using the weather as a weapon for 10 years, 9 years in Vietnam from 1960-something until 1971, 62 to 71, totally without oversight. Interestingly here, I got some pictures brought up by a good friend of mine, Nick DeVore, former world champion big mountain telemark freerider, pro skier in Aspen. He's aware of this stuff. And there is the snowpack in Aspen, right? Not that. There you can see some unusual cirrus clouds, some unusual refractive indexes. Nick posted there early January in Aspen, where it's just too hot to snow. There you can see how little snow there is on the ground there in Aspen in early January. Planes leaving trails, creating cirrus clouds, trap heating cirrus clouds, more of that there in Aspen. But of course, you're not going to get any coverage of that from Protectourwinters or Auden Schindler. Thank you, Nick, for your tireless efforts. And it's important to note, you know, this guy, Auden Schindler, is the keynote speaker at the Climate Con, effectively named the Climate Conference 2018. I think it's in March. Auden Schindler, keynote speaker. Why? Why is this guy getting paid? Because he's pushing a bunch of bullshit on us. He's lying to the ski industry. This guy's job is supposedly to save skiing from climate change, but he's a con man. He's spreading a greenwashed agenda. He's in line with the Agenda 21. Here, more con men at the climate conference. None of these people are going to talk about the history of weather modification. None of these people are going to talk about geoengineering or weather warfare, except geoengineering as a proposed but not yet studied mitigation strategy for climate change due to the catastrophic impact of the second most powerful greenhouse gas, CO2. So here's your enemy, folks. These are people who have drank the Kool-Aid and are totally brainwashed on the topic. If you want to get in touch with these folks, please do. And I don't know, maybe I should go to this conference. What do y'all think? Auden Schindler again, coverage, you know, he's in the mainstream press all the time. Outside Magazine, how does he want to fix the mountain town housing crisis? Density. Density, a big part of the Agenda 21 thing. Pack everybody into a bunch of houses really close together, put them in these real small spaces, and then give them all a 5G smartphone to cook them cancerously. Yeah, so there is your Auden Schindler right there for you, ski industry. Until we stop supporting these people that are full of shit, we are not going to have any solution to the low snow issue. Here are a couple videos I'm going to paste into the comments. I made this one years ago, critical analysis of a book that Auden Schindler's cited heavily in, Deep, The Story of Skiing and the Future of Snow. Blatant propaganda out of Powder Magazine's editor-in-chief. This is a great interview with Dominic Marama. Pasting that one into the comments. Live interview with Dominic. He is a backcountry snowboarder based in Banff, Canada, where they got pretty good snow. And the coverage here, you know, he's the guy who put together all those news articles, him and Jim Lee together. Jim Lee, the indomitable Jim Lee behind climateviewer.com. But we had a great interview with Dominic on this topic earlier this winter, November 8th, 2017. So do check that one out. And going after TGR and POW, you know, it's amazing how time flies. This video is 5 years old, but here's another one of me calling out the liars back in the day. So on that note, again, there ain't no snow. It's not my fault. It's not your fault there's no snow. You shouldn't really feel bad that, you know, you drove your car today when you live in a city that was engineered to be impossible to navigate without a vehicle, right? You shouldn't really feel too bad about your own personal CO2 emissions when the largest polluter on the planet is the United States military. And the United States military also confirmed to have been using the weather as a weapon all the way back in the 1960s, 50 years ago. So the more you know, my friends, the more you know. You know, why is there no snow? I don't know. Why have there been these horrible, you know, catastrophic wildfires in California, mudslides, wacky weather all over the world, the whole planet heating up? Is it CO2 or is there more to the story? I think if you look at the historical record, you can safely conclude that there is, in fact, more to the story than we have been told about. Again, if you want to learn more about this topic, go on over there to weathermodificationhistory.com. Check out their timeline. Check out the historical weather coverage in the mainstream press. These guys, Jim and Dominic, doing some amazing work on this topic, very reputably, keeping all their opinions out of it, which is something I am not very good at, but I am good at calling out people who are full of shit. So, on that note, your boy Mog signing off for today. Y'all take care. One love. Keep your tips up. Keep your stick on the ice. And if you got snow, go out and enjoy it. Signing off. One love. Peace.